Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV, and we have this kind of one-off solo show for you in between the Rise of the Third Reich and Armored Actions, which commences tomorrow. So today we are looking at an event that was taking place in the Netherlands 77 years ago, kind of right now, basically, and it falls kind of between the Ardennes offensive. Yes, we're going to kind of hark back to what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, and Operation Veritable, which we covered in February last year. And our guest, Edwin Popken, has been on the show. This must be about his sixth appearance, possibly seventh. I don't know, something like that. He has been a supporter and a presenter right since the beginning. And I'll remind you right away, he is a battlefield guide in the Netherlands, but also can take you to other places around there, Hertgen Forest, or into Belgium, Germany, Market Garden, Arnhem. He is a go-to guy. So if you are considering coming to Europe when travel opens up again and you want to see somewhere in that area there, his contact details are in the description below. So we are trying to help each other out in these dark times as we come out, hopefully, at the end of COVID. I remind all our new viewers, if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, please make sure you click that button and click the little icon, the bell, so you get notifications, and maybe consider becoming a member of the channel and possibly a patron, so we can continue bringing these shows all through the summer, and I don't have to go back to being a tour guide again. But anyway, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Edwin. And good evening, Edwin. How are you today?
I'm good, Woody. Yeah, I had a lovely day today. And how are you?
I'm very well. So you were in Hertgen Forest, and I reckon I was on Omaha Beach on a jolly. So we were both going to our battlefields. You can't keep professionals away from the areas they want to talk about. So anyway, this in my introduction there, with this battle we're talking about. Remember when we did the show with Peter Caddick Adams, and he was talking about the uncertain end of the Battle of the Bulge, because different armies, different historians have said it ended differently. We know when it started, but the end is a bit more open to debate, really. So before we kind of get into what we're talking about, how does this connect to the Ardennes? I know you're going to be explaining that as we go along. I mean, it's to do with rivers, isn't it? It's to do with I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. It is part of this show and this presentation, because if you want to understand the battle that happened here, and we're talking about the Battle of Kapelsche Veer, and that's the correct pronunciation in Dutch, Kapelsche Veer. So, it's not a very well-known battle. I think many Canadians will know it because of the involvement of the Canadians there. Though it wasn't just an exclusive Canadian operation, but we go into that later. It's a relatively unknown part, but it does have a very strong connection to the 11th offensive. And when we go into the details, I will start by explaining also how Kapelsche Veer itself connects to what happens hundreds of miles further southeast in the Ardennes offensive.
Well, great. And folks, if you have questions, of course, we'll put your comments and questions up on screen as we go along. We may do questions as we go along. We may do them at the end. But basically, I trust Edwin to explain this because he's done this several times before. His Veritable show was fantastic. We've taken us to Wolf Hazer with Joe, and we've done several things. So over to you, Edwin. And I know we've got some Canadians, people like Brad from On This Day in Canadian Military History are watching. So if they have comments and consider it and questions, fire away, please, Brad. And everybody else, welcome along, and we're glad to have you this Sunday evening or morning or afternoon, depending on where the hell you are in the world.
Yes, indeed. It's good to know that we've got some Canadian viewers, and I was certain that some of those viewers from Canada would log on tonight. So hello to all of you also from me. So what we're going to do tonight, Woody, and as questions and comments are coming in, please share them with me, because even though I set it up a little bit as a presentation, I would appreciate if we could make it a little bit interactive. Yeah. So any comments or questions from you, Woody, or from the viewers, please pass them on, so we can get into those details. So what we actually see here on this picture, it's actually two pictures. It's a picture of just after World War II. That's of course the black and white overlay, and a picture in the back. And the picture in the back is the monument, now the monument that's now at Kapelsche Veer. And the tree behind it is the only surviving object in the area. The rest, it's all gone. It's all cleared out. And it is said that one of the trees that you can see now in this 1945 picture, which is the overlay, should be the tree that you can actually see, in color. So I've still not been able to figure out if that's true, and whether, and if it is, which tree that is. So if anybody has any clue to that, please come, please make yourselves known. And but it also shows you, if you were to present that picture, and we'll go into that a little bit later near the end also, Woody. But if you would just present that 1945 photograph to somebody and say, have a guess, when and where was this taken, I would bet that about at least 80% of the people would say Western Front, 1918, somewhere. Yeah. It doesn't look like a typical World War II picture, does it? And
absolutely,
that sets a little bit the scene of Kapelsche Veer. If we want to understand the Battle of Kapelsche Veer, it's not that there were, extensive trenches opposite each other and that sort of thing, but there is a side to it that was more comparable to some of the conditions in which some of the fights during World War I were fought than it was a typical World War II battle.
Yeah.
So, mind you, this was in the middle of winter. We're talking about January 1945. We are talking about the severest winter, at least up to then, in Northwestern Europe, 20th century. So very, even also in the Netherlands, it's very cold. It's there is snow there. There is a lot of wind, so the wind chill factor, it comes into play. The Netherlands being a wet country with all the waterways we have, so it's always very damp, which adds to the conditions in which and it makes these conditions even more severe for those guys being out there, them being Allied or Germans, right? Everybody is in basically in those same gruesome conditions trying to fight this battle.
And weary and knackered and tired. Again, whenever we talk about this period, some of these troopers have been in the line for months, if not years. German side, Allied side.
Mm-hmm.
A cold winter doesn't exactly help, and a wet winter to kind of improve your morale. Mm-hmm. There'd been this kind of hope the war would be over, and it's not. It's carrying on. The Ardennes offensive has pushed everybody. Mm-hmm. Things back, so nobody is really in a good position morale wise at this time of year.
No, I guess not. No, it's and exactly what you say. Many of those men were expecting the war or hoping the war to be over by Christmas. Now it's January. It's going nowhere. Right. So okay. So basically, let me see how to do this like this. Very easy. So this is basically some of the subjects I wanted to be talking about tonight. So in the introduction of the show, Woody, we said we were going to focus on Operation Elephant, the Canadian attack on Kapelsche Veer. But before we do that, we're first going to talk a little bit also about the initial attacks, which happened between the 31st of December 1944 and 14th of January 1945. And those were attacks which were respectively carried out by the 1st Polish Armored Division and 47th Royal Marine Commando, both of them well known from Normandy. So they were also in it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But we're also going to first kick it off with talking a bit about the context of the Battle of Kapelsche Veer, also how it ties into the Battle of the Ardennes. But also, about the terrain and the German defenses and the defensive capabilities of the terrain there. Because if we want to understand this battle, again, you have to we always have to do that. We know that. But especially at Kapelsche Veer, you have to look at the ground. You have to look at the conditions, the terrain, and what it was like, especially back in 1944. So that's about what we're going to talk about. And at the end, we're going to talk also go a little bit into the details of the cost of the battle, not too much the financial cost of obviously, but the cost in human lives. And the big question also I want to address at the end is the question why, because whenever I talk about Kapelsche Veer or you take guests there, this question always comes up. Why did we fight there? Why did we just leave the Germans alone there? So, and there are some theories about that and some ideas about that. So I'd like to go into that as well. But let's go and talk about context and terrain first, I guess. So this is a picture that maps actually a large part of Belgium and the southern part of the Netherlands. And it's a picture that actually it's the situation of the 20th of December 1944. So when the Battle of the Bulge just started, and you can see some of the red arrows a little bit on the right hand side of that map. And of course, what the Germans intended, you see a blue line going from south to north a little bit on this map, and that's supposed to be the Meuse River. And you see a couple of dotted lines that just animated themselves onto this map, representing basically what the German intent was, very briefly, right? Get across the Meuse River and capture Brussels and ultimately capture Antwerp, the harbor at Antwerp. So normally when we talk about the Battle of the Bulge, we only focus on this on this main story, because this was actually what the Ardennes offensive was about, right? And you know, in your shows in during Ardennes week, that's been covered, you know, in great deal. What not many people realize that the Ardennes offensive was not the only offensive that the Germans planned at that time. The Germans were planning on so-called support attacks or support offensives. And one of those offensives was to be carried out by the 25th Army, German 25th Army, which was situated in the Netherlands. You can see the 25th Army in the top of that picture. And that's also where you will find Kapelsche Veer. There's a red square there, or rectangle more. And that's about where Kapelsche Veer is. So just to give you a little bit of reference with respect to the southern part of the Netherlands and Belgium. So what would have happened when the German army, if the German army had crossed the River Meuse, then the 25th Army was ordered to start a support offensive from 3 sides in the Netherlands. And that's actually would have looked like this. So 1 coming from the Dutch Isles, and 2 coming from a little bit from the north towards the city of Breda, and then past Breda, hitting Antwerp from the north. And you can immediately see, Woody, what this would have meant. They would have cut off the Allied armies in the Netherlands and in part of northern Belgium, not just from the south and the southeast, but also from the northwest. And the Germans were able to, or thought they were able to do that, because at that point in time, the line was very thin at the Allied side. So the only things that would oppose the Germans was a couple of Royal Marine Commando units on the Dutch Isles, some Dutch troops in the area, Princess Irene Brigade, but predominantly it was the 1st Polish Armored Division, which had a defensive line, I think, of about 50 kilometers.
Wow.
And if we talk about the 1st Polish Armored Division, we must understand also that the Polish Armored Division was at that point in time very low on personnel, and the person and getting in replacements for the Poles was very, very difficult. So at around December 1945, more and more replacements were actually former Polish men that had been pressed into German service and had been captured by the Allies in Normandy. And they were given a choice, you know, either go to a POW camp, or, you know, turn around and we get you in in the into the Polish First Armored Division or other Polish units. The problem of these men was that their morale was very low. They were still much in awe of the Germans, and the state of training was also very poor. So that means that you have a armored division there that was not, how to put it, not on top of their game. It was actually, they were actually assessed in such a way by General Crocker, British general commanding 1st British Corps, but then serving on the in the Canadian Army, in the 1st Canadian Army. And General Crocker actually wanted to pull the Poles out of the line altogether, give them a couple of weeks worth of training before committing them into the line again. But they couldn't do that because they were short-handed. And especially when the Battle of the Bulge started, a part of the British 30 Corps also had to move south to help out, at least temporarily. I think Jonathan Ware covered that in one of your shows.
He did, yeah.
Yeah. So that also meant that, you know, there weren't a lot of reserves in the Netherlands for the British and Commonwealth armies at that moment.
And just to go back to the Polish armor, that the strength that they'd had back in June was of a unity of having a lot of them come from the same place, a lot of weight before they go into combat. You know, when Jenny Grant has come on and talk about the commanding officer and what have you, that some of these guys have been together for years before they've even seen combat together, or at least seen combat within an armored division. So you start bringing in Polish troops from the German forces and integrating them. You've got a whole unity issue and why are we here and the bonds they had before. But that is the nature of any allied division that's been fighting since Normandy. You're losing progressively your best people, the people that the non-coms and officers. So yeah, the Polish armored division then was not as good as it had been a few months earlier.
No, and still they had to man about 50 kilometers of the line, right? So which is, and especially when the Battle of the Bulge hit in, because most of 30 Corps moving south, and also with the Allies had some information that there would be a German counterattack or a support offensive from the north. It goes a little bit out of the context of this talk to go into too much detail about that, but that would be excellent for a different talk one day maybe. But what they needed to do is they had to create some reserve, and that would be the 4th Canadian Armored Division. I'm sorry, 4th Canadian Armored Division. So the 4th Canadian Armored Division could not be on the front line at that point in time because they had to be in the rear to counterattack any German attack, you know, in the Kapelsche Veer area or in the Nijmegen area or whatever. That means we could say that the Allies, at least the British and Canadians, were actually gambling a little bit there and just hoping for the best and using intelligence and to the best of their ability, also in conjunction with Dutch resistance, and just hope that the Germans wouldn't, you know, do an all-out offensive also from the north, because that would have put them in a really tight spot, at least. However, we do know that the Germans never made it across the Meuse River. So 25th Army in the north never got an order to actually start that offensive. So that is actually an offensive, a support offensive that was planned, and the Allies knew that the Germans were preparing for that. They were massing men and material and ammunition and all sorts of even paratroopers at different airfields there. So the Allies were fully aware that something could happen, but luckily nothing did happen. But it does mean that there's a threat. And that threat at Kapelsche Veer was quite real, because that was the only place where the Germans held a small bridgehead on the south side of the River Meuse, or the Meuse as it's called in French, in the Netherlands. All across the board, they were thrown back across the Meuse River, except for that tiny little speck on the map, which is called Kapelsche Veer. And that, of course, becomes a problem because the Germans could use that as a jump-off point for a spoiling attack, for a supporting attack, for even for patrols or raids, and that just had to go. And that's in fact what in a very brief summary, what Kapelsche Veer is. It basically it's all about what kicked it off kicked off the entire fighting over there. So what are we talking about? If we zoom in, and this is a Google Maps of a Google satellite picture, as you can see, zooming in on Kapelsche Veer, it's basically a man-made island. So what you would see, you've got the Maas River, the Meuse River, and a little bit lower than that, you've got the Oude Maas, or the Old Maas, the Old Meuse River, as you can see on this slide, and that's actually the original Maas River. However, late 19th century, early 20th century, the Dutch, straightened the Maas River a little bit in this area, which created this man-made island where Kapelsche Veer is also situated. And that island from east to west is just about 12 kilometers long, and north to south on its broadest point about 1.7 kilometers, so about a mile. So it's not incredibly big, but that's the entire island. If we look at the battle area was even smaller than that. The battle area is actually very confined. So we're talking about an area, and Kapelsche Veer, I'll just use my pointer a little bit. I hope you can see it. This is the Kapelsche Veer, actually the ferry across the Meuse River. This is the German defensive positions. And the battle area itself, where the fighting took place, from west to east, is about 3.5 kilometers wide and about 650 meters north-south. That's it. That's just it. And if you, for instance, take a MG42 or an MG34 machine gun and place it somewhere here, with an effective range of about 3 kilometers or 3.5 kilometers, you could easily hit anything left or right or to the south. Everything would be well in range. Right? So that's and that idea, keep that idea in your head, because that is pivotal to understand the confined space where they're fighting. But it's not just about a confined space, it's also that Kapelsche Veer, by the mere nature of the island, only has three avenues, possible avenues of attack. Either along the dike from the west, from the dike from the east, or from a small bridge which the Germans blew up earlier when retreating through the Netherlands, and then via a small road directly towards Kapelsche Veer here. There's no other real option to attack this position here, meaning that the Germans could just focus on those three avenues, and your job becomes incredibly easy, especially if you realize why these avenues of attack are so predictable. Because if I use a 1944 map and overlay it, then you can see all these blue small lines north-south in this picture. And those are ditches. Those are gone today, so you won't find them in the modern day Kapelsche Veer if you go there. But there were a lot of, let's say, very small strokes of land and numerous ditches from east to west running north-south. That also obviously means that any attack through here would be, any attacker coming through here would be hampered because they had to cross all these ditches. Yeah. So that slows you down. Trying to get a tank or any armored vehicle through there, it's impossible because of all these ditches. So, and that actually is the reason why there are just three avenues of attack, and everything is very predictable here. So we're talking about ground here, Woody, which favors the defense incredibly. That's basically the bottom line here. And from an attacker's point of view, you know, if you look at the ground, we see some more images and also modern day images later on. It's basically, if you have to attack over that sort of ground, you could safely say that that your number was up.
This is where we're beginning to get that sort of reminder of the First World War, because when we think of those kind of trench warfare, the enemy always know where the attack is going to come from. They know where they're going to go to, and it's open ground with kind of nothing in the middle of it. So it's that reference of the fact that this isn't Normandy where you can use hedgerows to outflank and you can appear anywhere. This is somewhere where the defenders know if there's going to be attack, it's going to be coming from there, or there, and that's it. That's our only options.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So, and I will show you some footage and comment on that also a little bit later on. So first, this is a picture that was taken to oblique aerial photographs taken on the 29th of December, so a day before the fighting started here. So this is about as, you know, as timely as you could get it. And it shows you a couple of thingies. Of course, you can see those lines there, the ditches there. But you can also see there is a small ferry house here. I hope you can see my mouse pointer moving. That's a ferry house that was reinforced by the Germans. The Poles would call that objective D. The Canadians called it raspberry. They used fruits. There is another on the other picture, and I didn't put them together completely because it's a little bit overlapping, and the airplane is flying a little bit away during those pictures, so it's very difficult to get them exactly overlaid. So I just
made a gap.
I didn't match them completely because of that. So, but there's also a house there. That was the house of the caretaker of that island. And that's called, by the Poles call that objective C, Canadians call it grapes.
Right.
But what's more interesting, so here we also see the ferry point, but what's more interesting, you see all these red circles here. And if you would zoom into this picture, each and every, all these red circles, there are German slit trenches, aka foxholes. And also what we can see here, if we are zooming in a little bit more, but we can't do that, we don't do that now here, there is a zigzag line here, and that's a proper trench. So the Germans already on the 29th of December were pretty well dug in, being able to hold anything that's coming from the west, so from this direction, from our left, but also from the east and also from the south. Mind you, you will see that later, this piece of ground is a little bit higher than the rest.
Right.
Giving the Germans even more advantage. Why the Germans have dug in here, it's actually part of a dike. And what they also did, we should also see that a little bit later on very clearly in one of the images, modern day images, is that the Germans could use that as some sort of a breastwork.
Right.
So,
so if just to interrupt you, we've already had a couple of people, Scott Grimwood and others, asking about air power. What is available to the Allies? What is there any support? Why can't they bomb the crap out of this? Just, I mean, I'm sure you're going to be addressing this as we go on, but just an initial introduction to the air power situation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good question. Well, we do have to keep in mind that it's winter.
Yeah.
You know, so weather conditions are, you know, very poor sometimes, which means that sometimes these airplanes can't take off, or they can't find their targets because of ground fog or low clouds and that sort of thing. So air power, it's very difficult. They did try to bomb the Germans out of there once, or at least once, but that just didn't work. And it also didn't work because the Germans not just dug those slit trenches and trenches, but they also went into the cellars of those houses and even dug underneath the dike into tunnels, small tunnels, and just had their underground, let's say, cover. And to understand that, you have to think World War I trenches again, where the Germans, you know, when they were bombarded, they wouldn't be in the trenches, they would be in the dugouts. So they got the same type of dugouts dug here into the dikes as well. And some of these dugouts have been connected with underground tunnels, so that the Germans could go back and forth without, you know, popping the head up and being shot. So we could say that the Germans were quite savvy about this. You know, they were doing things quite intelligently. I think that's a fair thing to say from a German perspective. So the Allies tried to bomb them, but you know, it just didn't work. The Germans wouldn't be budged. So in the end, it would fall on the infantry, and only the infantry, to, you know, just get them out of there. So now I'm hoping this works, Woody, because we in our
trial, it's working now.
It all worked, but now it's hampering a little bit. So let's see if we can move it forward a little bit more. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, as usual, folks, when we did the test, the video was perfect. Now on the day, it's jerking a bit, but even if it's not moving, you can see perfectly well from those still images.
Exactly here for a little bit. We are now almost where that German caretaker house or Grapes was. We're looking east, and you can already. So we're looking into easterly direction, one of the avenues of attack, and we're looking a little bit. We see that road bending off to our right, and that's the attack route coming from the south. But what you can clearly see already is that the ground is completely flat and completely open. And that's also key to understand here. And that's also why I said, you know, if you are a defender, you know, you're dug in, you're pretty snug. You have a couple of machine guns, you can just fire away. If you're an attacker, this is what you have to, you know, this is what you have to traverse. And we'll try to get a little bit further, hopefully. Oh, here we go. Here we go a little bit. See, it's jerking a little bit, but you can, I hope the viewers get a little bit of an understanding of just how flat it was. And also, if we look at this for a bit, you know, you're German, you're on the little bit of high ground here. The only little bit of high ground here, and it's just open and flat. So I think it's always a little bit dangerous to make too much of a comparison with World War I, too much of a comparison. But I have been once or twice to the area of Fromelles, and this area in some ways reminds me of that, in as much that it is just like Fromelles, it's completely flat. You know, and German defenses just controlled all the open ground, and there's no way to get through the Germans, but over about 600 yards of open terrain. Mind you, I'll repeat that again, 600 yards of open terrain. And that's from the south. If you're coming from the east or the west, you have to traverse at some point, as we will see, about a mile. You know, I think it's fair to say that anyone who has World War I experience and was told to attack over open ground for 600 yards to a mile would say you're bonkers. Yeah. That will get us killed. You know, it can't be done. And yet, this is what they were up against.
And Pat has made the very good point about if the Allies had been bombing it from the air or artillery, in muddy ground like this, the impact of shells is lessened considerably. It's not like bombing a city where you got hard and concrete and stone, where the bomb can hit and detonate and send, and the ground, the rocks it hits or the concrete it hits become projectiles out. This is hitting a mud where if the explosion goes off, all lost in the ground. Very good point to make.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. That's indeed a very good point. Yeah. So, coming back to that same point again, it is just, up to the infantry. Basically, this is an infantry's job, and I think history has shown that as soon as things are, a pure infantry job, things tend to get really ugly.
Yeah.
So, and that's well, spoiler alert. That's about Kapelsche Veer. It's getting really ugly. Okay, so so the first attack comes in on the night of the 30 on the 31st of December. So basically around midnight, just past midnight of the 31st of December. And what the Poles do, they have their armored infantry, and they actually do a 2-company attack. One comes from the west, and one comes from the east. Like I said, predictable avenues of attack. But what the Poles also tried is they tried to send one platoon straight through the middle. And in this talk, we want to focus a little bit on the Canadian part of things, but so I won't go into too much details about the Poles, but we do have to mention it in order to understand also why the Canadians did what they did and prepared like they did. So we just have to go through those motions, and of course, also I think we can't talk about Kapelsche Veer, but also without also giving some attention to the other troops that also fought there. But just keeping this a little bit short and sweet. The first attack of the Polish Armored Division comes in a 2-company attack, and it doesn't really get near. I think the eastern attack gets nearest. They get to about 50 yards from the German positions on the eastern side of that German defensive position. So that would be, let's see if we can. That will be in this area. On the western side, this side they don't get that far, just because the amount of German machine gun fire, the amount of German mortar fire, the amount of German supporting artillery coming from the north bank of the Maas River, it's just massive. So I think the entire attack doesn't last very long either. It's within about an hour or so they're already done. I think even under an hour. It's already clear that this attack is going nowhere. So and the intent of the Poles was just to clear up a small bridgehead where they believed that there was about a platoon to maybe a company of enemies. It was assessed to about 150 tops. And to be honest, this assessment continues throughout the Battle of Kapelsche Veer in January by different units. And we know from interrogation of IPW reports, interrogation prisoner of war reports, and reports from Germans after the war, that those assessments were more or less correct. So at no point in time during the Battle of the Kapelsche Veer, the Germans had more than about 150, 160 men. Sometimes they had very low numbers, running to about 50 or even less. But that was really near the end. But we're talking about 2 companies here attacking not even a company, and they just been kept at bay. So second Polish attack comes in on the 6th of January. Again, night attack, the evening and the night of 6th and 7th of January. That again fails. The Poles again try also go to the middle, and again it completely fails. So the Poles they stop the attack, regroup. They also give in their reports, and if you read books about it, it becomes clear that the morale factor and the poor state of training is a great worry also for the Polish commanders. So one of the things that they find is that when they were retreating back to where they get over the Old Maas River, that jump-off point, and that's about here on the left bottom corner about-ish. They have a crossing point, create a crossing point. When they fall back, they find a lot of guys there, which during the attack already retreated. Meaning that in that Polish attack, a lot of guys don't even follow up with the attack. They just think, okay, too dangerous for me, or just scared, or low morale, and they already filter back while other Poles are still attacking, creating chaos. So what they try to do, they try to reorganize, and the next night, the night of the 7th of the 8th of January, they again try to assault. And at this time, this is the most interesting assault that's coming in from number 3 company, a special assault group. They go right through the middle, and they actually manage to get onto the objective C, what the Canadians call grapes. So that's the house of the caretaker.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like the Poles managed to bring that attack home, but Germans, well known for their counterattack, effectively start mortaring and shelling the Poles in that area, and then start counterattacking them. And the Poles just in the end have to fall back over that open ground again, because they lost so many men. They practically out of ammunition. There's no reinforcements coming forward. So effectively, what you could say, their incomplete position is untenable.
Yeah.
You just can't hold on. This also sets the recipe for the rest of the attacks, or the recipe, the template. This is about the template for Kapelsche Veer for many of those attacks. You try to move forward, you gain some on the Germans start shelling you, they counterattack, you are being thrown back. And repeat.
Yeah, and you mentioned the fact that Germans have got these underground bunkers. They can move from one position to the next, and they can just bide their time and judge when the attackers have got themselves stretched, when the support troops are far behind the advanced troops, and then hit them at the most vulnerable moment when it's unfortunately the Germans are very good at that. They've been doing
and
that
if you're in underground dugouts, you can easily call for artillery and mortar fire on your position because you're safe. And your enemy above, in this instance the Poles, they're just screwed because they are on open ground. Also, what the Germans could do, because of the connecting tunnels, and they could sometimes pop up behind you. And there are several accounts, especially from the Canadians, that actually happens. You clear out a section of a trench or a couple of dugouts, and then you go further, and all of a sudden the Germans appear behind you again. And that just adds to the chaos and to the losses and to the ferocity of the fighting. But we're not there just yet. So the attack coming in from the south, I hope this one works a little bit. If not, then it's jerking also. This shows you. Let's stop it for a second here. This shows you the attack where the Poles came from. So they came from what nowadays is the modern bridge you see on the left-hand side, and basically came over this open muddy field. And this footage was taken last year by me in January, around the same time as we are talking now. So mid-January, end of January. And if I would go there today, I would see the same thing. So you see, it's clay ground. It's really wet. The Germans slightly inundated the entire area also. At least at that point, it was still slightly inundated. It would get worse later. But going over this ground, I had that because I was in that field when I was there. I had my Wellingtons on, and it was a good thing I had them on, Woody, because I was just soaked into the mud. It was just soaking me. It was just
So it sucks you in. I mean, it's that
in.
You can't move fast. The faster you try and move, the more you sink in.
And these guys, you know, they're in their kit, you know, with their weapons and all their stuff, and they have to attack over that open ground. I would think that these guys could hardly run through that area. Again, we're talking about 500-600 yards of open ground that you have to traverse into the teeth of machine guns.
Yeah.
Right. So I think History Explorer, a buggy, muddy, sticking nightmare. I think that sums it up. You know, that about sums it up. Thank you for that. Yeah, Passchendaele Mark. That's you know, you can make all those types of comparisons.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's the same type of condition, and that's also why I said in the beginning, you know, it's in some ways, certain ways, this battlefield is more reminiscent about of World War One, even though it was a World War II battle. It's that conditions are more reminiscent to some of the conditions we know from World War II than anything we know from the Western Front in World War II. So let's see if it pans a little bit further, so we can. Please try to work with me, computer. Here we go. A little bit. Let's see what comes up. Oh, yeah, it jerks a little bit. Sorry about that, folks. But it gives you a little bit of an idea. And also, you can still, again, you can see how flat and open this all is.
Remind us away which way we're facing.
We're now facing southwest a little bit.
Yeah. We're where the camera is, where the Germans are, essentially.
Yeah, it's just a view from the German direction into the south. So this is the south, the southern dike of that island, right? So behind that is the Old Maas, the Old Meuse River. So yeah, again, you can see what's coming. You know, half a mile away, and sometimes literally from a mile away. Pardon.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So pretty much after that second attack, the Poles have been are spent. They can't do any more. You know, they're short of men. Morale is low. They lose quite a few men in those attacks. So and the Poles are just not able to do it by themselves. So the decision is made to temporarily attach 47 Royal Marine Commando to the Polish armored division. So Polish armored division is still in control of the area, and the Royal Marines, 47 Royal Marine Commando, which is a battalion-sized unit, but a Royal Marine battalion, right? So not 850, but about 450 men. It's a very quite small units. So they are attached, and 47 Royal Marine Commando also had a shortage of men because just weeks before they landed during the Battle of the Scheldt at Flushing on Walcheren Island, and also had their share of casualties there. And in order to make up for these casualties in this attack, number 5 troop from 10 Inter-Allied Commando, a Norwegian troop, was attached to Q troop of 47 Royal Marine Commando, just to make up for the numbers. That created a lot of difficulties, especially because quite a few of those Norwegians couldn't understand any English, or let alone talk English. So how to communicate on a battlefield, right? So that was quite difficult. And of course, the commandos themselves, you know, they're short of men also, so they're not on full strength either. But yeah, they are commandos. They are specially trained for special assaults and such, and they also have a go at it on the night of the 13th and 14th of January 1945, with 4 troops coming from the west, and Q troop supported by number 5 troop Norwegian from the east. Again, you know, the Germans know where they must come from because, again, the predictable lines of attack. You know, you just know where the attack is coming from. From this point onwards, actually, nobody tries the the gamble that the Poles took in the beginning by sending some troops right through the middle there over those ditches, because it just wasn't working. The attack on the eastern side is actually quite successful, also in as much that they also managed to gain this eastern part of the gain the eastern part of the German defensive position. So around that caretaker house, Grapes. Though it was still called Objective D at that point in time, because it's a Polish operation still. So the but again, like with the previous Polish attack, also Q Troop and Number 5 Troop Norwegian, they also, they take huge losses, pretty much out of ammunition. Germans started counterattacking again, so in the end, there's nothing for it, but to just, fall back again. One of the things that's also bothering them, it also bothered the Poles, but it's getting increasingly troublesome, is that Germans on the north side of the Maas River, so that would be about here-ish and there-ish, are also firing into their flanks. So that means that the Germans apparently get more and more aware that they can, just create some sort of a perfect ambush position to the west and to the east by also having supporting troops, machine guns and mortars, just across the river, and just fire into anything that comes across this dike. And the only thing that these attacking troops can do is, fall back on the southern part of that dike, so to get a little amount of cover. Mind you, these dikes weren't that high. If you look at a typical Dutch dike nowadays, these are quite high. Back in the days, as I understood it, especially also there on that island, these dikes were not that high. So if you would stand upright, you might have already have your head above the dike, which would make you vulnerable.
And as you said, any German machine guns on the north, they're going to know exactly where there's any little low spot, or there's a little bit where there's a little gully or something. And it's just, the Germans going to be funneling the attackers into exactly where they want. They're not going to fire their machine guns randomly. They're going to know exactly where someone's going to appear, where there's, as I say, a little slightly low spot on the dike, or where, perhaps a tree had come uprooted and there's a little gap in the root. It's just a nightmare situation. And as everyone's saying, it's a nightmare.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, Woody. And also, I think mortar and artillery, the Germans are quite a professional army, as we know. They're quite good at what they're doing, even though they have had a severe beating. That knowledge is still there, and I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know any data about it in the sense of primary documents that state something to the effect, but I wouldn't be surprised that the Germans would have, certain points zeroed in for their mortars and their artillery, so they just know, in any case of any attack, we have to shoot there, and there, and, just annihilate the enemy or cut them off completely from reinforcements. And, it's, from a German perspective, you're having quite an easy job in some. Right, so now we are mid-January, and it's going nowhere. So, and higher levels debates going on what to do with Kapelsche Veer, and you have to do something, because in matter of about a couple of weeks, about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and then we will be talking about the end of the first week of February, the 8th of February, 1945. The Allies, as you know, are planning a massive operation called Operation Veritable.
Yeah.
And a couple of days later, about 2 days later, the Americans would support that operation, American 9th Army, temporarily attached to 21st Army Group, and would launch Operation Grenade from roughly east of Aachen, and also crossing the Ruhr and also into Germany towards the Rhine, and meeting the Canadian British Army somewhere near the Rhine. So that's a huge and big operation, which would face all the Allied armies eastwards. Now, here we are in the Netherlands with this German bridgehead. If you're facing east, it will be in your left rear.
Yeah, it's behind you. It's on your flank, and that's it's annoyance that's behind you.
And it's just not just an annoyance, because we are just a couple of weeks away from the threat of that German support operation, which the Allies were expecting because they had intelligence that said so, and even Dutch underground reports also that supported that. So they had multiple intelligence that the Germans were planning a support operation. So you must ask yourself, how sure are you attacking east that the Germans in that rear are not pulling some sort of a spoiling attack or anything else, right? So Kapelsche Veer becomes a liability. Again, yes, it's a threat to your supply lines. Yeah, it is, you know. And if the Ardennes, in my view, if the Ardennes have proven anything, then it is that you can't get complacent with the Germans. The moment you think they are beaten, the moment you think, oh, we have them cornered, you know, we don't, they won't do anything anymore. We don't need to worry about a German attack anymore. You know, they'll hit you.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. So what's not to say that, you know, days, weeks after the start of the Ardennes offensive, and mind you, just 2 weeks after the start of Operation Nordwind in the Alsace, that the Germans are not going to pull something on you here. You just don't know. Yeah. So the only thing that you can do, in my opinion, is to get rid of that bridgehead, because that would leave the Germans across the Maas River, and you at least have that, you know, that big river as some sort of a moat between you and the Germans.
I just want to remind people, it is crazy now, though, as well as you've explained that we're reminding ourselves it is at most 150 Germans in this strong point. You know, we're talking about armies moving to the east later on in Veritable, and yet there's this thorn, there's the little kind of pinprick of a German position of just 150 guys that is proving such an inconvenience, such an annoyance isn't the word. I mean, it's not like it's 2 divisions of armor. We're talking 150 guys. It's crazy.
Yeah. So enter 4th Canadian Armored Division.
Yeah.
And I selected this quote because I think this is just a great quote I found in the war diaries of G-Branch, so the operations war diary. And it's a quote from what they wrote, the diarist wrote on the 14th of January. So this is the day that, after the night that 47th Royal Marine Commando fought there.
And floundered, yeah.
Right. So the next day, the Canadians already got the assignment. Okay, Poles can't do it. 47th Royal Marine Commando failed. We need to make this a bigger operation. Right. Like you said, Woody, 150 Germans. And the Allies are thinking, we need to make this a bigger operation because we can't hack it. So, but I really like this quote because it does tell you that the 4th Armored Division was quite aware that, you know, this was not a good assignment. You know, this was not the one you would be volunteering for. This was not one you want to have. But, you know, nonetheless, you have it, right? So, it's just a yeah. I think it sums up the feeling of that moment. And how they assessed what was going on at Kapelsche Veer, right? So the Canadians go about these things. I wouldn't say, I have to be careful here because I want to avoid saying or that people interpret my words that the Poles and the Royal Marine Commandos were just mucking about a little bit, because they were not. You know, they prepared, they planned, they did their best. You know, all of them did, but it just wasn't.
I mean, on sheer numbers alone, I mean, standard military doctrine is if you're attacking a place, you want to have 3 or 4 times numerical superiority over the enemy, and not even at that. Royal Marine units, they're smaller. As you said there, the Poles been struggling to integrate their new replacements, their new people there. It's not like the Allies have been sending in thousands. It's not been many more than the number of defenders. As you said, the defenders have got these trenches, foxholes, underground tunnels. They know which way the direction's coming from. You need more. Simply, the answer is it's not about the lack of effort put in by the Royal Marines and the Poles. It's just simply not enough people. And someone said that earlier, not enough resources put into to them, and therefore they've not been successful. Not been successful rather than failed.
Yeah. So what the Canadians start doing is, they start preparing, massively. And if you go through the war diaries of the units involved there, it just oozes with, the amount of planning, and it's just incredible. They didn't leave, I think, anything to chance, at least in as much that they could prepare for something, they would. Right. So just going basically, first of all, through the plan, because you need a different scheme, you need a different plan, right? The east-west thingy just didn't work. But what to do, because there's just 2 to 3 avenues of attack. So how much variation can you put into a plan? Well, the Canadians come up actually with an idea to have a assault boat force of canoes, Canadian canoes, which are brought over from Canada just especially for this operation, and train part of their attacking force to the use of those canoes, and they would go onto the Mars River on the south side, and canoe their way forward, and basically gain a small bridgehead left and right of the ferry point.
Yeah.
The idea behind is that you want to prevent the Germans from that they keep reinforcing that bridgehead, because what has become apparent during the Polish and the Royal Marine Commando attack is that the Germans during the fight keep ferrying people across in order to reinforce and make up for their losses. So what you want to do is to prevent that. And the way to go about is, according to the Canadians, is that assault boat force. Now, the second thing that we will do, and you can't see this on this map, but just a little bit further to the east, at the far eastern side of that island, they start to repair some bridges and do a lot of other engineering work, part of which is being done to make the Germans believe that the next attack won't come at Kapelsche Veer, but it will be a river crossing further east.
Yeah.
So, and that also would mean that one of the companies is coming from that area. That will be C Company of the Lincoln and Welland Regiment. These are all Lincoln and Wellands here. Well, the A Company, is coming in a little bit further to the west and attacks forward, gains a jump-off point really near, and then C Company would go through, whilst B Company would come in from the east. So this is the rough basic plan, right? Everything else has been planned around this.
Yeah.
Right? Because this just shows you the basic movement of people. And it looks like there's nothing else going on, but there's of course a lot of other stuff going on in order to make sure that this actually happens.
And I'm, I know we're going to get into this in a minute. The 2 points I have, one is the positive is you're giving the Germans something to think about. They've had everything coming from the directions they're predicting them. So coming in with canoes is giving them something. The threat of another attack further to the east is giving them something to think about. So that's all positive. My immediate thought about the negative is it's a lot of things to get coordinated together. If the canoe force end up being there on their own, you've got to coordinate all this precisely, or you end up with forces on their own, exposed and isolated. So, yeah, a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, indeed. Okay,
but I'll hand back to you.
Yeah. So, but this being the basic plan, right? So, and this is one of the things I found in one of the war diaries. It's just the amount of information that they have, and I realized that from a screen this is quite difficult to read. But they this, for instance, here says, okay, No obstacles to carriers. It's just this tiny bit here of the dike. There are 45 mines in this area, so if we cross here with one of the companies, be careful. There are 45 mines in here. There are German positions here, there, and also about here. There's an approach ramp built here that we can use. So what they do, if you read the war diaries, they go. One of the things that they are doing is that they are talking to both the Poles and the Royal Marine Commandos, and getting all the information and all the intelligence that they can get, and also the experiences of those former forces. You know, how did you go about things? What went well? What went wrong? You know, what we have to take care of. You know, specific points you have to address. All sorts of things above. You know, and that's on top of their own reconnaissance in the area. All right, so this is just a small piece of information that you can find in those war diaries that just gives you a little bit of an idea of the planning that comes into this operation, right? And sometimes this planning is in minute detail, because, you know, if you look at this, for instance, this is a map of that of the Kapelsche Veer area, right? So it shows you, you know, some of the trenches that they have, building bunkers, tunnels that are there, tunnel into a cellar, more tunnels into cellar. So area around the house, network of communicating trenches, building bunker, you know, all these. And this is not the only information that they use, because there's also several aerial photographs that they use to, you know, to identify enemy positions and such. They get a lot of supporting artillery, and this also gives you a little bit of a glimpse of how important this information is. How important this information or this operation is also for the higher up. So, you know, we're talking about Corps, Army, and even Army Group, because it's not just the artillery of 4th Canadian Armored Division that's helping out. It's also where do we have it? Heavy mortar platoon of the 1st Polish Armored Division.
Right.
It's artillery of the Poles. It's even the 4 Agra. So Army Group Royal Artillery. So those are 21st Army Group assets, right, that are attached to this operation. I think this is quite relevant, because at the same time that they are planning this operation and trying to execute this operation, they also start preparing for Operation Veritable. So what you ideally would do is to not use 4 Agra for any other operation, because they have to prepare for Veritable, right? Yet somebody, probably a 21st Army Group, because that's the only level that could say 4 Agra goes here or there. You know, it's somebody must have assessed, okay, this is so important that we, you know, send 4 Agra to first join this operation. Once they're done there, they can come to the Groesbeek area and start supporting Operation Veritable, and hopefully be in time there. And what's not on this slide is also that, you know, there are some supporting units, heavy machine guns and mortar units from the 2nd and 3rd Canadian Infantry Division supporting them here. 2nd and 3rd Canadian Infantry Division were not part of British 1st Corps. They were part of Canadian 1st Corps. So that means that Carrera must have decided, we're temporarily lending these assets from, which are attached to the Canadian Corps, to 4th Canadian Armored Division to do this operation. Again, 2nd and 3rd Canadian Infantry Division are preparing for Operation Veritable. So you're using assets that have to prepare for one operation to first do another operation. You can't do that if it's considered a local or non-important attack, as I know some historians sometimes have claimed. I just don't believe it. I think Operation the battle at Kapelsche Veer had some weight even on army or maybe even army group level. Engineers and special equipment. Now, one of the things the Canadians also did, they heavily invested in not just in canoes but also in flamethrowers. Essentially, ground tactics being, we are going to flame the Germans out of there. Meaning we're getting up and close with them and just, burn them out. That means that they have to have those flamethrower carriers they call wasps. Got 14 of those. And infantry carrying flamethrowers called live boys. 61. It's just the attacking unit, right? There's 61 of those flamethrowers. And all the assorted stuff. 79th Armored Division, Hobart's Funnies, are also in support with a couple of those LVTs, buffaloes they call them, to transport the troops across the. I think the Canadians even call them crocodiles, if I'm not mistaken. But somebody might correct me on that on your feed. But they also use those to get the troops across the southern part of the old river.
Yeah.
Right. So a Bailey Bridge platoon to start building a Bailey Bridge while they are fighting there. So, it's just a masses. And ammunition storages. Again, we're stockpiling here for Operation Veritable, and then then just look at this operation. We 25 pounders. We're talking about a total of 75,000 shells, either smoke or high explosive. Right? We're talking about 4.2-inch mortars, 7,000 different mortar bombs. Yeah. We're talking about all those. Look at the small arms ammunitions that they have and the grenades. I read somewhere that a officer at 1st Army Corps who had been in the desert said that 4th Canadian Armored Division requested and received more ammunition for their medium machine guns than bullets for the medium machine guns than bullets spent at the first day of El Alamein. Wow. By medium machine guns. I don't know if it is a true statement, if that man was correct. I do know that he made that statement, but I think it just puts things in perspective for us. This is not regarded as some backwater operation. This is a major offensive while preparing for Operation Veritable to go in days after that this operation ends.
Yeah, and it's reminding ourselves as well that the because Veritable is going to be starting in a few days. This is get it done once, and make sure we can reinforce it as well. There's no the time for messing about, and I'm not saying the Royal Marine Commandos and the Poles are messing about, but any more delays cannot be considered now. It has to be solved and sorted once and for all.
Yeah, and there is a snatch for the Canadians, because even though in the initial stages of Operation Veritable, 4th Canadian Armored Division was not involved, there were some plans already that at some point 4th Canadian Armored Division would be pulled off the line, transferred from 1st British Corps to the Canadian 1st Army Corps, and then join the advance into Germany. Meaning also that 4th Canadian Armored Division was not in a position to lose too many people and too much equipment. But yet, they say to the Canadians, okay, go do this. It's almost sound like, they have to do it. It's a gamble, but they have to do it.
Yeah.
You know, you find this type of material, detailed target maps for artillery and mortars. So we've got all these objectives, and if you would overlay this on the map, you will just see this is the northern side of the Kapelsche Veer, with this area being the area where the Germans are entrenched. You know, this you've got different lines where they can call in barrages over the radio. We've got traces that show the smoke screens that they were going to put up in order to cover all the movement forward. The smoke screen program was, I think, I think a lot of people who are a little bit aware of Operation Veritable will be quite aware about the smoke screen that the Canadians put up during Operation Veritable, which was immense. It really was immense. But I think this was practically the same type of operation, but on a smaller scale.
Right.
And the idea being that, you know, the Germans would be blinded on the north and the south side of the river, and even they had floating smoke pots that they would float down the Maas River in order to create extra smoke for so the Germans couldn't see where the Canadians were at. Not the infantry on the dike itself, but also not, of course, the guys in the canoes.
Yeah.
Because they would be extremely vulnerable out on that river. So, you know, current and moonlight charge, you know, they leave nothing to chance. They knew exactly what the current will do, at what point, when it will be moonlight, when the moonlight would be down, you know, bar overcast, you know, it just shows you the level of preparation and the detail that goes into that to, how we put it in some, you know, we leave nothing to chance.
It's a force multiplier. I mean, this is the thing. When on World War II TV, we've discussed at this point of the war, this is where the Allies have their strength. They have their strength behind the front arm. They've got meteorologists and planners and people who can sit in these agras and work out this and compare it to previous data and previous operations. This is where the Germans, by this point, are struggling with that kind of thing. They may have 150 men well dug in on a dike there, but they haven't got this kind of strength in depth now. This massive, if we think of the triangle that is the Allied army, the point of the sword, the point of the spear is the infantry, the armored division. We have this massive, great logistical resource behind us. So we have departments who can look at this. And this is something that we don't want to use men to finish off the Germans now. We want to use technology and steel, and this kind of preparation is the ideal way to do it.
Yeah. And at this stage in the war, you can see from this type of evidence that the machine is very fine-tuned.
Yeah.
You know, it's just in peak condition. And to put it in different words, the professionalism of the Allied armies at this stage of the war is basically, they are on top of their game.
Yeah.
You see the same thing in Operation Veritable, you know, and you see the same thing with the Americans in the Battle of the Bulge, especially in the, you know, the way they go. But I think Peter Caddick-Adams also talks about it, you know, that about the level of professionalism in the American army at that stage in the war, and how that helps them to actually, you know, absorb that initial shock and then, you know, stop that onslaught and push them back. But you still also see that with the Brits and also with the Canadians, and not just in this type of operation. You see that in different other stuff as well. But the professionalism at that point in time, you know, it is at a, you know, at a, I think it's peak level.
Yeah,
definitely. You know, it's all those lessons that they've learned over the past. It is in some, you know, if you look, and we briefly touched on El Alamein, if you would look at the British Army, and also with that respect, Canadian Army in 1942, this is a completely different army. Also in their professionalism, in their skill, in their knowledge, in their machines, in their equipment and how to use it, in their doctrine. And This is a machine that can beat and will beat the Germans.
Yeah.
Okay. Deception program. Just briefly, what they will do in more to the east is do that deception program. I briefly touched upon it. Right, so they would use a smoke screens across the Maas River further east to make the Germans think, oh, Allies coming across there, they're attacking north into the Netherlands. They even have a platoon standby to do a raid if the Germans don't believe it. Then let's raid that village. That might convince the Germans. Right, they have the South Alberta Regiment, 29th Canadian Armored Regiment. They would be in different position firing into the Germans in order to simulate that an attack is imminent. And they do all that just to make the Germans look over their shoulder and focus, however briefly, somewhere else. Because even if it's just for half an hour or an hour, and every minute, every quarter of an hour.
Essentially, the Germans have been used to getting it their way. They know where the Allies are coming from. Mm-hmm. They've been controlling the battlefield, is a way of putting it. And this is the kind of thing to ask them questions, make them not sure what's going on, just make them second guess. And what's happening over there? What's happening over there? Adding a bit of unpredictability to the attack, which will always help the actual attack. Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah. So, and training. It's a lot of training that they do. I just got brought in a couple of stills from a film that's you can see on YouTube. If you type in Kapelsche Veer 1945, that video will pop up. Many people still think that that's actual combat footage, but it is not. It's training footage. And they use some of that training footage to talk about the Battle of Kapelsche Veer in the cinemas, in the newsreels. You also see some tanks firing at Germans, but I can see from the background that that's not near Kapelsche Veer where they're firing. That's somewhere else in the Netherlands. I don't exactly know why, but it doesn't look like Kapelsche Veer a bit. So it must have been recorded somewhere else. But that aside from that, it's a great video to watch.
Yeah, give us an idea of what was going on.
Yeah. So what they do, you see that Canadians in full kit. Training with their canoes on a small canal somewhere about a dozen kilometers from the battlefield. They're geared up for winter warfare in white suits. And also what they do, they bring in bigger radios. One of the problems that the other attacks also had is that the radios would not work, probably because of the damp conditions and the snow and other reasons. So they need bigger and stronger radios. But how to carry those radios across the battlefield? Well, simple. You use sleds, and that's what you see in that bottom picture in the middle. And that's also them training using those sleds to just use that and get that equipment across the battlefield.
Yep. Great stuff.
Right. So, 26th of February 1945, Operation Elephant, as they call it, starts. And again, a quote, which I think is a very good quote that gives you an idea of what it was like for those guys. So this is a quote by Lieutenant Wigg. He was with the South Albertas. And when he came onto the battlefield, he wasn't in the initial with the initial troops, so he came in, I think, a day later. But look what he writes, right? So all the way up, we saw bodies of German and our own dead, wrecked vehicles, etc., and the whole place looked like a 1914, 1918 battlefield. This is a guy on the ground.
Yeah,
he already recognizes it as something that where his father fought, probably.
Yeah.
It's nothing that he would expect in 1945. So, and yet he finds himself in exactly that kind of a situation. So we're not making things up when we're making comparisons with the Great War. The veterans themselves at the time already did it. Just going quickly a little bit through the motions, because if you want to read about the specific battle, there are several books out there, also Canadian books that write about this battle in more detail. So I would urge people to want to find out more about this battle and more about the stories of men that were there to read those books. There's a book by Mark Zulke. About the kind of winter on the Mars, or winter warfare, or something. Can't remember the title from the top of my head now, but something to that account, and that also covers Kapelsche Veer, for instance. There's a good book also in Dutch, but only in Dutch. It's not translated into English, about the entire battle of the Kapelsche Veer and the German support attack, which never happened before that. That book is out of print, so it will never be sadly enough translated into English. But Victory Campaign, yes, thank you. That's also one that covers this. Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
So initially, it's the Lincoln and Wellens that go in. Just basically one battalion, and 3 companies. A and C company come in from the east, and B company comes in from the west. D company is actually in the beginning is in reserve. Now, what I'll do in the next couple of slides, I'll have the per day of this attack. We'll be covering the main movements in that area of the attacking units, and there will be some red arrows depicting the Germans, of course. And I will have then a end of day situation that will show us where the Allies were, where the Canadians were at the end of that day. All right. So the first, the 26th of January, the attack goes in. Smoke screens are thrown up. Smoke screens are actually so thick that the forward companies like B company and A company quite quickly asked to stop throwing smoke because they are choking.
Wow.
And they are hampered in their own operations by that smoke, which eventually also leads to different, to the situation that the smoke starts disappearing, and the Canadians become visible for German defenders. Right? Specifically, also, what also happens is that the canoe attack obviously goes in. What happened with the canoes is that because of ice float on the Raz River, the boats cannot are basically pushed towards the middle of the river and basically to the north of the river, where also the smoke screen is a little less thick,
right,
and less effective, which means that the Germans on the north bank of the Mars River are starting to see the Canadians' canoe past them. And that, of course, leads to enfilading fire. Several boats are scuttled. Several Canadians, they get into the water. Some of them get out. Some of them don't get out. But most of the a small group of those Canadians, I think about 15 to 20 of them, off the top of my head quickly, managed to get to about 500 yards, 400 yards from their objectives. That's how close they can get at most. There they have to get onto the island again, and try to get embroiled with the Germans. But from that point, they are troubled because many, if not all, of their weapons are frozen because they became wet in the canoes. It's sub-zero temperatures, and many of these weapons just malfunction, so leaving Canadians with hardly anything to fight with. A company gets forward pretty far, but are thrown back, as you can see here a little bit, about a couple of 100 meters by German counterattack. When they are being thrown back, also the canoe party also managed to join them. At least some of them do. Not many of the canoe party, as I understand it, came out. C Company tries to push through them, but they're not getting anywhere anymore. In the meantime, on the western flank, B Company also, they get to a point they call Peach. That's the point where they begin what they call their end run. So that's about a mile of ground they need to cover towards their objective Raspberry, the ferry house. But when they're about halfway and the fog lifts, the smoke lifts, I should say, they get heavily embroiled with Germans. Germans start shelling them, mortaring them, machine gunning them. Canadians try to dig in, but the ground is frozen, so they can hardly dig in. And in the end, the Germans just start counterattacking them. And the guys from B Company that are still capable can do nothing else than just withdraw. End of day situation is basically also that D Company has moved forward, and D Company is moved forward into this area, as you can see, and that's done because the Germans also pull a trick on them. The Germans send out a strong patrol coming south through that what is now completely inundated country. It's completely underwater, even worse than with the Poles. But the Germans managed to get a patrol onto the south side here, and that patrol moves up into this area and starts sniping towards B Company. And the Canadians fear that B Company might be completely cut off. So what they need to do is bring D Company in to guard that flank, effectively getting all the Lincoln and Wellens in. Now, B Company has been a very heavy hit, but A and C Company actually are worse hit, to that extent that A and C Company have to be withdrawn. They have to be replaced, first of all, by an anti-tank platoon, and the anti-tank platoon later that evening is also replaced with a company from the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada. And A and C Company are basically, at that point in time, combined. That's the only way that they can keep the men in their field, because they have lost so many men that A Company and C Company on their own are not effective anymore.
Damn.
And that's just, a couple of hours fighting, and then it's done.
Yeah.
So this is basically what you will see at the end of the day. So that will be around midnight on the 26th. So what we can see here is that A and C Company have been moved all the way around and brought up again. And B Company, that was in the north here, having also suffered severely, have been withdrawn completely. D Company have been moved forward, so they take the point here now, and the anti-tank platoon guards their flanks. Now, why do they do that? Because one of the other things that the Germans did while there was fighting here, the Germans start crossing here, also attacking in the rear of B Company here. So in order to make sure that the Germans wouldn't do this again, the anti-tank platoon was situated here to guard their rear. We talk about anti-tank platoon, but they were in an infantry role at that moment.
Infantry role, yeah.
Argylls and Sutherlands are about here-ish. So keep in mind, D Company, Lincoln and Wellens here, about a kilometer from their objectives. Argyll and Sutherland here, also a little bit under a mile from their objective. Right? Now, what does that look on the ground? This shows you where D Company of Lincoln and Wellens was, and let's hope that this will move forward a little bit. Yeah, we're panning now. You can see the Mars River here.
Yep.
Let's hope that it will go forward a little bit more. And yeah, let's stop it here. We're now looking east. So the tree line we can see here, this is where the Germans are at. This is a mile away, 1.6 kilometers. And this is the ground that you have to traverse as a Canadian.
Yeah, damn.
Right? And this is the amount of cover that you get. I have to say that nowadays it looks a little bit different than in 1945, of course, but you know, the basics, the fundamentals, it's still the same. This is just it. This is what you have to cover. Now, if you look from the opposite perspective, what the Argyll and Sutherlands were, you've got this. So here you see that mount again with that tree that from 1944 that's still there. So that's the German defensive position. This dike was much lower during 1944-45, and here you have a very low dike running actually, and this is the eastern approach. Again, you can see no cover whatsoever.
Yeah, terrible.
Absolutely. So next day, the most important thing that happens is you can see the Argylls and Sutherlands are attacking now from the east, and D Company Lincoln and Welland moves forward in this direction. But what the Germans do, they also, again, further to the west, they try to cross at several points, at several times during the day. Not very large patrols, but some patrols nonetheless, that cause a nuisance and a concern to the Canadians, because the Germans, if they can manage to get a toehold somewhere here, they can attack into the rear here. And this, of course, is a crucial junction for the Canadians. But what the Germans can also do is they can cross the area here and attack the crossing point here. And that crossing point, they are building a Bailey Bridge and a pontoon bridge actually here. They are building to get tanks and carriers across in order to support the infantry. So they need to guard this area. So what they do is that B Company, which was in reserve because they were spent the day before, they are being brought up to guard this area. So they got every little bit of the route of advance into the battle area, and the carrier platoon also now dismounted and used as normal infantry. They go forward and they take over from the anti-tank platoon and will extend in this direction and this direction, and especially into this direction, easterly direction, because D Company Lincoln and Welland is also moving east, and they want to keep a continuous line in order to prevent the Germans from infiltrating behind them.
Yeah.
D Company, even Lincoln and Welland, starts attacking here 3 times during the day, trying to gain the main German defenses here. They get really, really close, but 3 times the Germans counterattack and throw them back again. Heavy losses, which at the end of the day also causes that D Company is spent after a day's fighting. So this shows you a little bit about the state at the end of the day. So 2 days fighting, and the Germans are still well in control of the entire bridgehead. And the Canadians are just, they just trying to defend this supply line, a supply route here. They're trying to defend and guard the junction here. And they have troops on the dike a little bit forward. And half dug in, half not dug in, because how to dig into frozen ground. Right? What you basically want to do, you want to get into captured foxholes, captured German foxholes, or into shell holes.
Yeah.
That's what you want to do. And then just lie there. And once you lie there, of course, your body warmth will cause some thaw. So if things get wet, you get cold, you get wet, you get miserable. If you're not being shot by the Germans or killed by the Germans, you will get, respiratory diseases. You will catch trench foot or something like that, pneumonia, all these kind of things come into play. Continuous shelling, mortaring, sniping, German counterattacks. So quite a few of those guys, even if they're not wounded, they suffer from what we now call PTSD, shell shock back in the day. Right, so I think even if we wanted to, it's very hard for us to really truly understand just how much of a horror this was for these guys.
Yeah, definitely.
28th of the January 1945, the attacks and the counterattacks still continue, and what you can see is that even the Germans try to get a patrol across again in order to try to hit them in the flanks here. It doesn't work, but it shows you that the Germans are still very counterattack minded. So that tells us that the German, even after so many days, and also they get grievous losses, and they try to reinforce during the night and during the day. But during the day is also very difficult and dangerous for them, but especially during the night. And they still just won't give up. They just hang on there. D Company, A Company, Argos and Sutherland, they Argos also suffer grievous losses. Effectively, what you can say that every company that's been, put in the forward positions within the day they spend. It's just one big meat grinder. And the only tactics actually that the Canadians can employ, I think the best way to describe it is bite and hold. The old World War One, what they also tried to do at Messines, for instance, bite, hold, exit, and that kind of, and that gets you into a meat grinder immediately, right? It's just a battle of wills and just a battle of who can take the most losses.
I was going to say that it gets to the point where it's just a battle of who's got the most grit, because logic is kind of saying give up. I mean, you can't just give up in the military environment, but it's now just who is gonna break first, who's got the will to keep on going, who's going to find that extra bit of determination to just just battle your way through, because
it's a last man standing game.
The artillery's done, the smoke's done, everything's committed now. It's just about men overcoming the fear, I guess.
What the Canadians also do is they try to get these carriers forward. They try to get tanks forward. Some of these carriers can't navigate the steep dikes, so others get stuck in the mud. So hardly any of these wasps actually get forward. Tanks, we could talk about Sherman tanks or Canadian Ram tanks. I think by that time it's all Sherman. But they also try to get forward, but they churn up that ground. It becomes a quagmire. They run aground, they get stuck in the mud, they have to dig them out again. The support by armor is also just not as much as they would have liked to. Still, they're trying. They're trying to get engineers forward to improve the dirt roads, because it's just dirt roads over there. It's all mud and all Shermans. Thank you. They're trying to reinforce those roads and dig these tanks out, just trying to move them forward again. Repair those tracks in the field if they've thrown tracks. You could almost say just inch forward. I think that would be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think that would be to get a mental picture of what's happening. It's just that. So you're not just battling the Germans, you're not just battling the weather, you're also battling, the ground condition and what that does to your equipment. And we're not even touching on what the mud and the humidity does to your weapons, your small arms. It just comes into play. Again, the Germans try to counterattack across the River Meuse. At this point, they are so worried that they have a platoon of the 8th Polish Battalion to join in and go a little bit further west and set up a defensive positions in this area to prevent the Germans from recrossing, and actually by having a strong point here and having Canadians here to dominate this entire area. right? And take care of any threat that even that day is coming across. Again, that shows you that the Germans, you know, they just hang on there. They are still offensive minded. So end of the day, we see the, you know, we actually see that they've not moved at all at the end of the day. You know, everybody moved forward, back and forth quite a bit, especially D Company, Lincoln and Welland, B Company, Argonne, Sutherlands. But end of the day, they are nowhere. And I'm actually thinking, you know, you see D Company, Argonnes and Sutherlands is attacking on the right. By end of the day, D Company, Argonne and Sutherlands, who had just been in for a couple of hours, are already replaced by B Company, Argonne and Sutherlands, Highlanders. So, wow, you know, we're chewing up companies here. Losses, 4th Canadian Armored Division was told to avoid, if possible, right? With in view of their future commitments. So, 29th of January, Canadians finally get a break. We again see German river crossings, especially a little bit in the area of the Kapelsche Veer itself. But on the eastern side, we see finally that B Company, the Argonne Sutherlands, managed to gain their objective, grapes, and are able to hang on to it. That's the most important part, because units before, not just the Poles and Royal Marine Commando from the east, also some Canadians have been into the German positions, but were kicked out time and again. This is the first day that the Canadians actually are able to, let's say, gain control over that eastern part of that bridgehead and that main German strong point of Grapes on the eastern side. But that still leaves Raspberry to the west, and all the Germans that there's there in slit trenches, tunnels, dugouts, underground stuff, shell holes, and what have you not. So, so that means that even then, at the end of the day, B Company, Argonne, Sutherland also spend. Right, so this is basically what you'll see in the end of the day. D Company, Lincoln and Welland is not really a force that can do anything but retain their positions on the dike. They're spent. But at current, they're not being relieved. They stay there in defensive positions and hold their ground. There will be some patrols, some small attacks towards the Germans, but not much. And the main attack is now coming from the east. So it's basically Lincoln and Welland holding on to their positions, and the Argonnes and Sutherlands driving the Germans out and squeezing the Germans into an ever tighter bridgehead. What you can see, the attack was made by B Company, but C Company of the Argonnes is now taking over at the end of the day. Again, also B Company is also spent. So for the 30th of January, it will fall on the C Company of the Argonnes and Sutherlands to take the attack home. And that's actually what they're doing. The next day, on the 30th of January, they start attacking Raspberry, so the other German strong point, the ferry house.
Yep.
I have to say they do have tank support in the area, but even with tank support and their own men and being able to overrun Raspberry at the end of the day, they still cannot gain complete control over the entire area, especially a little bit between them and the Lincoln and Wellands. There is a German machine gun post, which they just cannot subdue. They just cannot bring it, and they just cannot silence it. And it also shows you a little bit that, you know, by this time everybody is just at their end of their tether. You know, everybody is just spent, and it's. I can only imagine, Woody, that these guys must have been, well, could we see like zombies on the battlefield? And it must be just well, quite gruesome, I guess. So, if we're talking about this area, I'll just go back quickly one slide. Okay, so if we're talking about this area that held out at the end of the day, with Raspberry being overrun here, right? This is the footage of that area. So we are looking here. This at the light pole here. This is where the ferry house used to be, and this is the part of the dike where the Germans were dug in. Again, the video is not performing as I would have liked to. Let's see if it will jump forward like this a little bit. Okay, so now it's panning eastwards. And here you can also see that, this is about the height of the dike. This is where Germans are dug in, and they can use it as breastwork. They can use it as whatever they like. And the Germans are basically they're confined to an area which is not between, I think, the Lincoln and Wellens and the Argylls at that point in time. They are about 50 yards apart from each other.
Wow.
And the Germans in between. And they have a hard time of even sending patrols around and getting in touch with each other. It's and of course there's the added problem at that point in time. If you're shooting in a certain direction, you risk that you're shooting your own at the opposite side. That they're just 50 yards away. So the Germans, of course, don't have that kind of a problem. They can shoot everywhere and hit an enemy, basically. Right? But the Canadians have to be really, really careful where they're shooting, which I believe would also have hampered their operations at that stage quite severely. So, 30th of January, end of day, and this is where I took that footage that we just saw.
Yep.
Just this circle. This is what the Germans still hang on to, and to the ferry side. And for the rest, even C Company has been replaced now by the remnants, I should say, of A Company plus replacements. So we got green guys coming in right onto the battlefields. Good luck. Hope you live through the day. Right? And you can see D Company Lincoln Wellens is still not moving, but the Germans still hang on there and just do not want to give up until the next morning, when patrols of Able Company, Argyll and Sutherland start moving out in northerly and in easterly direction and gain contact with the Lincoln Wellens. And as it turns out, the Germans overnight have just vanished. They have retreated across the Maas River. And all of a sudden, it's done. It's the battle has ended in some sort of what I would reckon would be a complete anticlimax.
Anticlimax, yeah. You're wanting that kind of victory. Yeah, when you've got to, yeah. And do we know much about the German reasoning? Are there any German surviving accounts from the German side of things at this point?
No, not that I know of. Not at least good accounts. There are some accounts of German officers, but there's high-ranking officers that were
further up
this side of the river.
Yeah.
So we do know about some IPW reports that that confirm how many Germans were in there and how the Germans reinforced during the night and that sort of thing, and what units were on the island. So those were units of, at first, the 711th, if I'm remembering correctly, Infantry Division, and when the Canadians were attacking, they were from the 6th Fallschirmjäger Division.
Yeah.
So, and that was I think a division that wasn't that division in Normandy as well?
Yep, it was it. Yeah.
And I think they got pretty much chewed up in Normandy. They were reconstituted, so they had a lot of new guys in it. But still, they were as a division, they were quite a crack division. And of course, we're talking about Fallschirmjäger, right? So they always have this, let's say, esprit de corps. They always were trouble for the Allies.
Yeah.
So, and that's what they were up against. So that's probably also the tenacity. One of the other reports I read also is that that it struck the Allies that most of the Germans that they took prisoner were under the influence of drugs.
Right.
So that would be I think I know the Germans didn't use benzodrine, but some kind of amphetamine or methamphetamine that they used. Having said that, we also know that the Allies used them as well. They used benzodrine, right? That's also an amphetamine. So, but the fact that they mention it, leads me to believe that it was quite excessive on the German side of things.
Yeah, definitely.
And you got also these type of reports about the Ardennes, that the Germans they think that the Germans are completely out of their mind because of the drugs. That might have been the case here as well, and might also be part of the reason why the Germans held on so tenaciously.
Yeah. So, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. We're getting to the end of this. Okay, so this is a picture taken mid-February 1945. So a couple of days after the battle ended. And what you can see here is different things. Predominantly what you want to look at here is fighting positions. And I charted these fighting positions on this picture by giving them either red dots, those would be foxholes that you can still make out on this photograph, or trenches, and that would be the lines that you can see.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And it just gives you a little bit of an idea of how many fighting positions there were in this small area. It's just massive. And we can just zoom in for a second here. And then you can see for yourself what the area looks like. And it's also, it's just pockmarked also with shell holes for mortars and artillery and bombs and what have you. And I reckon that if I would show this picture, especially like we are seeing it now, because also, by the way, can see the inundated area quite well on this one. If you would show this to anybody with a little bit of historical knowledge, military historical knowledge, and without further context, ask them, okay, which war are we looking at? I think 9 out of 10 would not say World War II. I would reckon they say probably World War I somewhere.
Yeah, it's definitely got that trench line, that standard fixed position look. It's absolutely.
And just all the shell holes, it just looks like a static warfare kind of thing, and it's to me, this kind of a picture, it's a testament to the ferocity of the fighting here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which takes us to casualties, right? And what we know is that the Allies total about 550, with just a little over 100 fatalities. The bulk of which is the Lincoln and Wellens.
Yeah.
They just horrendous losses in those and mind you, this is a battalion-sized unit, right? So, and they've got in one battle 260 casualties.
And I'm assuming they weren't at full strength when they committed. I mean, all Canadian units at this point of the war, they're going to be under strength, platoons of 20 rather than 36, that kind of thing. It's going to be, the replacements just haven't been, there are no replacements. They're just, it's going to be, significant losses, this.
Yeah. German figures is also always a little bit more difficult, but the commander of the German 6th Fallschirmjäger division, division, General Plocher, after the war in an interrogation during a prisoner of war interrogation, estimated that there were about 400 to 500 casualties, and he didn't name any fatalities, but we do know that the Canadians found over 145 German field graves in the area.
Wow, yeah.
So, but that also means that the Germans suffered grievously, and that's just the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. We don't know about the 712 Infantry Division. It is estimated normally that it's about 50. Because pretty soon, when the first initial attacks took place by the Poles, the Fallschirmjäger division was in the process of taking over that area. So they lost some men. Other accounts sometimes have these figures a little bit higher on the German side, but as oftentimes happens with these German numbers, they're difficult to get a accurate assessment of an estimation of.
Which is bringing us up to the why.
Not yet, because almost because I did copy this one in. This is actually a sheet from the Lincoln and Welland war diary,
right?
And just to underline their casualties, this shows you the list of officers on the 19th of January 1945, so a couple of days before Operation Elephant, and between brackets it shows the casualties during the operation. And just look at A Company, B Company. It says D Company on the right there, but it should be C Company, and D Company is on the third row. But you can see of the attacking companies, A and D Company had no officers left.
Wow.
And the others had just 3 left each. But it just shows it's just a glimpse of how bad these attacks were. So that does bring us to the why. So what you normally hear a lot here, Woody, is that there was some kind of a prestige going on between General Crocker on one hand, the 1st British Army Corps commander in the area, and General Student, the German paratroop commander, on the right, who was commanding Army Group Holland, Army Group H at the moment. And that Student wanting to use the bridgehead for breaking in his inexperienced troops, and Crocker just didn't want to give up, and out of sometimes of a pure principle wanted to get the Germans out, and for no other reasons than that, and maybe also his last big thing in the war, because actually for one British First Corps wasn't attacking operationally anymore.
Yeah.
In these,
from the German point of view, if Student is a student of military tactics, which he obviously was, you know that it's coming to the end of the German occupation of Europe. Yeah, that the war is going to be lost. Yeah. I suppose if you've managed to be part of one last successful thrust, one last successful bit where you're causing that damage to the Allies there, it means maybe you're the one that's in people's thinking towards the end of the war. You're regarded as because we know now Hitler is having officers killed left, right, and center. Maybe it's that kind of, I want to make sure I'm still fully committed to this. I'm not going to give up. I'm going to make this stand, and I'm going to be remembered as being the guy who is still being aggressive and on the front foot. Maybe that's the German side. But the Allied side is harder to understand, I think.
Yeah, but also the German side, because we can also argue, why spend so many lies in breaking in your troops, right? So you lose, 500 men. And those were losses that the Germans could ill afford. And that at some point the Allies will go onto the attack, and you need everybody to at that point, we're talking after the Ardennes offensive, right? You already suffered grievous losses.
Yeah.
So you need everybody to just hold off the Allies from coming any further. So if you want to break in troops, why not on a quiet sector on the front, on the northern part of the Maas, and let them patrol across the Maas River a couple of times and do a couple of raids. This is just going way beyond that. So it is, you can argue both ways, I guess, but he also Student after the war, there was never really a good reason given for that. So, but I always say we do have to consider that strategic context, right? We just came from the Ardennes offensive. During the Ardennes offensive, that bridgehead was of severe concern. They knew that the Germans were planning of using that for a support attack. Just didn't know when and exactly where. And of course, you're planning Operation Veritable, so you're going east. So, do you really, from an Allied perspective, and I'm not talking about Crocker, but I'm also General Carrera, his commanding officer, and Field Marshal Montgomery, his commander, and even Eisenhower on top of that, do you really want to have that threat in your rear if you are, putting all your military assets turning east into Germany to end the war? Do you really want to do that? Because as the war is progressing into the end in the Netherlands, fast forwarding a bit, even the Poles at a certain time will get out of the line and start attacking with the Canadians into the northern parts of the Netherlands and northwestern Germany. So the lines get thinner and thinner there, as the Allies also don't have many reserves. So you need to remove that threat there, and also conversely, let the Germans know that they do not dictate what happens there. It's the Ally who call the shots. So you can't give the Germans a break, I think.
That's a good point. I mean, Peter Caddick-Adams made that point, but so does some other presenters in the Ardennes, is that since Normandy, despite some hiccups along the way, the Allies have been dictating the battlefields. Everything has been the Allied operations, apart from Lüttich and the cover, that the Germans react to. The Ardennes offensive has been the Germans doing their thing and the Allies reacting to it again. By January, the Allies need to be showing that they are controlling the battlefield again across Europe. It's Allies dictating the pace, Allies dictating which front is going to be important. And I guess there's an urgency to get back on with the original plan of pushing the Germans back that have been interrupted by the Ardennes offensive, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that context, it's purely logical, I think, to basically tell the Germans, you don't get to choose a bridgehead on our side of the river.
Yeah.
We don't allow you.
Yeah.
That
makes
because
sense.
we call the shots here. And if there is any bridgehead, it will be us at your end of the river.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. And you want to keep the Germans basically, let's use the boxing terms, in the toe, in the ropes. We want to keep them in the ropes. And that's what it's all about. I think what it's all about, annihilate that threat and keep the Germans in the ropes. So just to round it off, Woody, I think it will be only fair enough to give the last word to Lieutenant Wiggle again, who made the comment on the more 1914-1918 battlefield, because he also made a really good remark about the battle and the end of it. And I would say to your viewers, please read it yourself, because I think that about sums it up.
Yeah. And as several people have said, Edwin, during the presentation, especially, I mean, the Canadians are watching, Norma and Brad and others, familiar with this to some extent. Americans and Brits and other nationalities less so. There's a Dutchman who was watching it saying, I'm Dutch and I didn't know about this battle. So if people are describing it as the toughest one they've ever been in, and these are people who've been in some pretty horrendous battles and would be in some more battles before the war comes to an end, it's definitely worth pointing out that this was a real trial. It was a trial of combat, and it deserves more of a spotlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah.
Well, there we are.
There we are. That's it.
So there we are, folks. So as I reminded you, Edwin's details in the description below. You've also got there. He's on social media on various forums and his tours and things. The tour company, brilliant. Works with some highly reputable organizations. So you get a good tour with Edwin. So that's what you can do there. In terms of us, this will bring together this show to an end. But tomorrow we start. I'll put it on my screen. I'll come back to you in a second, Edwin. Tomorrow we start our armored actions, and for a first on World War II TV, we are talking about a non-World War II battle, in that we're talking about an armored engagement in the Spanish Civil War. But tomorrow's guest, Pete Blanchard, will be indicating how this particular battle a few years earlier kind of paved the way for some of the armored techniques and doctrine that were used in the war, the Second World War that followed. So that will be coming up tomorrow. And then we've got 3rd Armored Division, American US 3rd Armored Division on Tuesday, and lots more stuff coming this week. So as usual, don't forget to consider following what we're doing on Patreon, YouTube membership, share what we're doing on social media. Edwin's links in the description below. But as of now, it just remains me to say thank you very much for Edwin doing it. And as we always say, you're doing it in one of your second languages. I mean, you know, being Dutch, you can speak in about 17 different languages, but it's a fantastic job. We always love you coming on, and you are welcome back whenever you want to be, sir.
Well, it was a pleasure to be back on World War II TV, Woody, and always a pleasure working with you. You know that.
Yeah.
And in future, I'd be happy to give another talk, or do a live stream in the field again.
Do a live one when we get out to the battlefields again. That'd be fantastic. Yeah. So, folks, this is Paul Woodard from World War II TV saying enjoy the last bit of your weekend, or some of our Australian visits. It's already Monday there, which that kind of thing always confuses the heck out of me that it's already Monday there. But anyway, for the rest of us, I will see you all same time, 7 p.m. GMT tomorrow for our first look at armored actions here on World War II TV. Thank you very much for your company today. This is Paul Woodard saying, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Cheers, everybody. Bye.